In the introduction to A Rose for Emily, the townspeople of Jefferson, Mississippi gather for the funeral of Miss Emily Grierson. Miss Emily, a cold and reclusive 74-year-old spinster, lived in the town her entire life. According to the narrator, Miss Emily was like a monument to the past, a strange fixture of town folklore. In the rising action, Colonel Sartoris, the mayor, tells Miss Emily that she will not have to pay taxes. Then the story jumps forward again 30 years to when new government leaders send Miss Emily a tax bill, which she ignores, later insisting the Board of Aldermen speak with Colonel Sartoris, who has been dead for years. The narrative goes back in time again, this time to 1895, 2 years after the death of Miss Emily's father. Neighbors complain about a horrible smell coming from Miss Emily's property. After a heated discussion about how to handle the situation, the aldermen sneak over to Miss Emily's house after dark and spread lime to neutralize the odor. Homer Barron, a Yankee, arrives in the summer of 1894 to oversee the construction of Jefferson's new sidewalks. He and Miss Emily take buggy rides together every Sunday and seem to be courting. The narrative moves forward a year to when Miss Emily purchases arsenic from the drugstore. Everyone is convinced that she is going to kill herself because of Homer's insistence he's not a marrying man, even after a year of courtship. The Baptist minister talks with Miss Emily about her behavior, and the minister's wife alerts Miss Emily's cousins about what is going on. Miss Emily purchases a man's toilet set or grooming kit, a suit, and a nightshirt, which the people interpret as a sign she and Homer are finally married. But Homer is nowhere to be seen. He reappears on Miss Emily's doorstep shortly after the cousins leave town, but after that is never seen again. Miss Emily disappears too, emerging sometime later with graying hair and having noticeably gained weight. As the years pass, Miss Emily is seen less and less. When Miss Emily finally passes away in 1937, her servant lets the women of the town into the house, and then he walks out the back door for good. The story shifts back to the present. In the terrifying climax of the story, the townspeople break down the door to a locked upstairs bedroom in the old Grierson home a few days after Miss Emily's funeral. The interior is decorated like a bridal suite, but has the atmosphere of a neglected tomb. In the falling action, the townspeople discover on the bed the decomposed body of Homer Barron. In the resolution, next to his corpse on an empty pillow is a single strand of long, gray hair. Emily Grierson and Homer Barron are the two central characters in William Faulkner's Gothic tale, A Rose for Emily. Miss Emily Grierson was born during the Civil War. Raised by her very strict father, she ignored the cultural and social progress exhibited by the New South, preferring instead to uphold the customs and standards of the pre-Civil War South. She continued the Grierson tradition of believing her social standing was more significant than it really was, and believing her father's insistence that no one was good enough for his daughter, she remained unmarried into her 30s. Miss Emily allowed herself to be courted by Homer Barron, a man well below her class and a Northerner, or Yankee to boot, because upholding Victorian standards for women, namely becoming a wife, was extremely important to Miss Emily Grierson and to the community at large. Her suitor, Homer, unfortunately wasn't a marrying man, so Miss Emily secretly killed him, poisoning him with arsenic and keeping his body in a bridal suite that doubled as a tomb. After Homer's disappearance, Miss Emily became a recluse. The town didn't discover her secret until after her own death, nearly 40 years later. Homer Barron was a big, brash man with a loud laugh, making him an unusual romantic partner for the cold and aloof Miss Emily Grierson. He took Miss Emily on weekly carriage rides after his arrival in Jefferson, but had no intention of marrying her or any other woman. At one point, Miss Emily's cousins, strict upholders of Southern class traditions, arrive and try to keep her away from her suitor. But Homer wasn't the marrying kind. The text suggests that he was homosexual. A little more than a year after his arrival in Jefferson, he went into Miss Emily's home and was never seen again. Miss Emily Grierson had poisoned him and kept his body in her bed. In that way, Homer was never able to leave her. The Grierson House, gray hair, and a man's toilet set are the most important symbols in the short story A Rose for Emily. The Griersons' big, squarish house had been constructed in a lightsome or carefree style, with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies on the most select street in Jefferson. Throughout Miss Emily's youth, when she and the house were in their prime, she saw her hopes for marriage and a family deteriorate as her father judged each young suitor not quite good enough for his daughter. Thus, the crumbling house is a physical representation of the decline of the family's status and Miss Emily's descent into madness. The symbol of iron gray hair, like the Grierson house itself, represents a passing of time in A Rose for Emily. Emily Grierson's original hair color is never stated, but when she finally emerges from her house after Homer Barron's disappearance, the narrator notices her hair turning gray. The servant Toby's hair is also gray. And the townspeople track how long it has been since Miss Emily was last seen by the changing color of his hair. As Miss Emily ages, her hair grows grayer and grayer until it's a vigorous iron gray, like the hair of an active man. Her hair starts to turn gray immediately after Homer's disappearance. By the time her hair is completely gray, she refuses to cooperate with city officials on a number of issues. The graying of her hair over time symbolizes the strengthening of her iron-like will to live life on her own terms in defiance of social strictures. At the end of the story, the revelation of a lone strand of gray hair on the second pillow is the telltale sign that she's been sleeping next to Homer Barron's corpse. The man's toilet set Miss Emily purchases for Homer Barron is a generous gift that represents the hope Miss Emily has placed on an anticipated marriage to Homer Barron, usually including a brush, a comb, and a mirror backed with silver. Men's toilet sets were more than just toiletries. They were a status symbol that indicated membership in the aristocracy. Miss Emily believes that by marrying Homer, she will be able to save the family's name and position. But when the toilet set is seen later in the story, it is covered in a thick layer of dust. Disuse has tarnished the shiny silver. The HB monogram is almost illegible. Its decay symbolizes the crumbling of the ways of the Old South, the crumbling of the town's connection to the past, and the crumbling of Miss Emily's heart. Post-Civil War South, tradition versus progress, patriarchy, and pleasure and misfortune are the themes in the tale of the deterioration and delusion that is A Rose for Emily. Southern culture's specific customs and manners were an ingrained way of life. Those who lived through the war clung to the memories of life before the Civil War began. former aristocrats like Emily Grierson and Colonel Sartoris had families that were prosperous and powerful before the war. For Miss Emily and Colonel Sartoris, preserving the ways of the Old South was a means of protecting their family's legacies. Tradition versus progress is a theme that speaks to the citizens of Jefferson, who are divided into the older generation, which upholds the traditions of the Old South, and the younger generation, which is more focused on progress. These two parties continually butt heads about practicality versus proper etiquette, represented by how they want to deal with Emily Grierson. Southern gentility dictates women, particularly aristocratic ones, be treated as if they were fragile objects. Colonel Sartoris's promise that Emily Grierson will no longer have to pay taxes is an example of traditional Southern manners. 30 years later, the Board of Aldermen can't understand the mindset. From their point of view, no one is exempt from civic responsibilities, not even aristocratic spinsters. Everyone must pay taxes. Patriarchy cast a shadow over Emily Grierson's life, like it did for many women of the Victorian era. Victorian society was run entirely by men. Mr. Grierson effectively imprisons his daughter in their own home. He refuses any suitors who come to the door on the grounds they're not good enough for his only child. It is he, not Miss Emily, who makes the judgment. It is she who remains imprisoned after his death. Pleasure in Misfortune thematically adds another dimension to this riches to rags story by showing how much the citizens of Jefferson delight in the inevitable fall of the formerly mighty. When the news spreads that Mr. Grierson left his daughter practically nothing, in a way, people were glad. At last, they could pity Miss Emily. Her fall makes them feel they are her equals or superiors, which makes them feel better about themselves.